Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a journey that's honestly going to completely reframe how we view history, mythology, and the very concept of ancient magic. We've all grown up hearing tales of ancient wonders, mystical weapons, and legendary artifacts, right? And we tend to look back at our ancestors and think, well, they were just superstitious. They lived in a world governed by fantasy. But what if they weren't? What if what we casually call magic was actually just the scientific alchemy of their time? Today, we are going to tear down the walls between myth and science and decode the actual chemistry, geology, and psychology behind these incredible ancient wonders.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Exploding magic sticks.
So we are stepping back into a massively pivotal moment in human history, the 16th century. We're talking about those infamous, world-altering encounters between the Aztec Empire and the Spanish conquistadors. Now, when two wildly different civilizations collide, how does the human brain process something it has absolutely zero frame of reference for? Think about it. When the Aztecs first witnessed the Spanish firing their weapons, they literally called them exploding magic sticks. They didn't look at them and see beautifully crafted metal tubes, and they certainly didn't see engineering. No, they saw this impossibly loud, smoke-belching phenomenon that could strike a man down from a distance. To the Aztecs, these weren't just unfamiliar tools. They were viewed as literal, world-altering magic. The psychological impact of this, it honestly cannot be overstated. It was basically a tear in their reality.
On one side of the coin, we have the vivid, mystical perception of the Aztecs, the exploding magic sticks. But on the other side, we have the cold, technological reality, early Spanish muskets. And this perfectly establishes our core framework for today, from magic to science. Because when you don't have the scientific vocabulary for things like gunpowder, combustion, or ballistics, your brain just naturally fills in the gaps with mysticism. The Aztecs were incredibly intelligent, right? But they lacked the specific scientific data needed to interpret what they were seeing. So the result? A magical explanation for a strictly technological reality.
But this phenomenon, this translation of terrifying, unprecedented science into the language of magic, wasn't isolated to just the Aztec Empire. Which brings us to Section 2, Tactics of Ancient Magic.
What's absolutely fascinating here is the sheer bizarre nature of some historical tactics. Take the Persian Empire, for example. When they went into battle, they famously deployed what were perceived as sacred animals right on the front lines. They were essentially using them as living shields. Imagine being an opposing force and facing an army that seemingly commands the beasts of the earth. Wild, right? Then, think about ancient Greece. We almost always picture their statues as this pristine white marble, but actually, they were vibrantly, vividly painted. To an ancient worshiper walking into a flickering, firelit temple, these lifelike, towering figures would seem utterly imbued with divine, magical life. On a surface level, it all just feels so intensely mystical.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what was really happening beneath the surface. When we actually contrast the mystical descriptions with scientific reality, everything shifts. We see that the Persian sacred animals were actually calculated tactical psychological warfare. By using animals that were held sacred by their enemies, the Persians were basically paralyzing their opponents with religious dread. It wasn't magic. It was brilliant psychological manipulation. And those Greek statues? That wasn't some divine spirit animating the stone. No, it was early, highly advanced ancient chemistry and art. They were using sophisticated pigments and artistic techniques to create this overwhelming sensory experience. The magic was really just a byproduct of their incredible tactical and chemical ingenuity. So let's keep going and see how this builds into an even more unbelievable story. We're moving from ancient battlefields straight into the realm of a bizarre true crime mystery. Section 3, the Funhouse Corpse Hoax. 65 years. That is the astonishing number of years that a single chemically preserved corpse successfully fooled thousands and thousands of people. I mean, for over 6 decades, people looked at this thing hanging in a funhouse and thought they were looking at a masterfully crafted wax dummy. Just a prop, a piece of macabre entertainment. How on earth does a biological body defy decay so completely that it literally passes for a mannequin for more than half a century? Seriously, if you ever needed absolute proof that weird chemistry can create long-lasting myths, well, this is it. So, the crucial point is how the underlying chemistry actually worked here. Step 1, early embalmers utilized arsenic for preservation. Now, they didn't fully grasp the long-term mechanics of it, but they definitely knew it worked. Step 2, this specific application resulted in an unintentional extreme chemical preservation. The arsenic effectively hit the pause button on the biological clock, turning the body into something that was honestly closer to leather than flesh. And finally, step 3, This chemical anomaly birthed the legendary funhouse corpse hoax. People thought it was a magical prop, a fun little trick of the eye, but in reality, they were just staring right at a deeply misunderstood chemical reaction. The science was so incredibly good, it circled all the way back around to looking like a magical illusion.
All right, let's tie this all together. Section 4, Mythology as Data Interpretation. Because all of this, the Aztec muskets, the Persian psychological warfare, the ancient Greek chemistry, and that crazy arsenic-laced funhouse corpse, it all leads us right here. It all really comes down to this one definition. Mythology is early data interpretation of complex geological and chemical events. And that right there is the ultimate takeaway. You see, our ancestors were not foolish. They weren't simply superstitious children making up fairy tales just because they were afraid of the dark. They were early scientists. They were looking at highly complex, overwhelming data, things like exploding sticks, vividly real statues, or bodies that absolutely refused to decay, and they were doing the absolute best they could to interpret that data using the tools and vocabulary they had at the time. Mythology is, at its core, just science waiting for the right vocabulary.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. What modern magic might just be data we don't fully understand yet? I mean, if the Aztecs mistook a musket for magic, and if people mistook a chemically preserved corpse for a wax dummy for 65 years, what are we currently looking at in our modern world, right now, that we think is completely unexplainable or mystical, simply because we don't have the right scientific vocabulary yet? Keep that in mind the next time you encounter something impossible. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the magic around you.